Hello. In this video we're going to talk about win conditions and team play and how obviously the second one can influence the attainability of the first. And we'll try to provide you with some insight as to how we think about the game as the people who designed this current league setup. So, Aylin, we recently came across this Reddit article about chess, which was defending stalemate as a concept. And we're obviously making a separate video about ties, but what was the main point of that Reddit article?
Sure. So the game of chess, essentially, the way the author described it was that it consists of two parts. In the first part, the two players are fighting to get an advantage. And then the end game is where the player who has the advantage actually tries to close it out into a win. And we feel like that same concept is really applicable here because, again, the first half of the Mafia game, you have many different teams, up to 4 teams, competing for a position that they can actually convert into a win. And then the end game is where they actually have to try and convert it.
And that's harder for the teams that are not the town and the Mafia. So if you're the alien, you don't have as much control about the position of the game. And if you're the lovers, you don't have that much control because you're mostly usually trying to stay alive. But for the town and the Mafia, it feels like it's a war of attrition in the beginning. Which team will lose their supremacy first? So for the town, what is that? Like, is it just the votes?
It's just the numbers. It's also just the special roles on both sides. Obviously, the town wants to keep their police and doctor and hunter alive as long as possible. Similarly, the Mafia probably want to keep their axe and prostitute alive as long as possible. And the earlier the balance shifts in favor of one or the other, the more concrete the end game becomes in terms of what realistically you can achieve. And I think that's what makes this setup different from other setups, in that this setup has a lot of forcing moves. So a lot of the actions are mandatory, right? Night kills are mandatory, executions are mandatory. And so the sooner you realize what is realistic to attain in an endgame, the better you can play to actually achieve the best possible outcome.
Yep, and maybe like one of the best examples I can think of is you're a lover in a small endgame, but there's no foreseeable way in which you can eliminate the town. So you're star-crossed lovers. You're a Mafia lover in that pair. You know who your Mafia partners are. Maybe you just out them to try to fight for a tie through the votes on that same day. But maybe you go for the win. Maybe you see a path to the win there. But realizing what you're trying to play towards and like what is attainable, like theoretically or practically, I think is a big part of how this game plays out. And yes, sometimes you can't win. But then what you should be pumping yourself about is I can get this tie. I can shift the tide in a way that favors my team towards this tie.
Right. And so really the first half of the game is doing your best to control the situation so that you have that path to victory in the end. And if you don't have it, you don't have it. You happen to be the Mafia role that doesn't control the parity as well. You happen to be the town role that can't actually accumulate information over time.
Yep.
But what we're not seeing a lot of in the game so far, and what we're hoping to see more of, is people recognizing that going for certain outcomes may not, like, sort of overstepping in a way, right? That going for certain outcomes may not necessarily achieve them, and that it's better to consolidate the position that you already have and make the most of it, rather than going for something that may result in not the outcome you want, basically.
Yep, so that ties up that video, and I think the short sentence that summarizes it is nothing happens by accident, play the position you have and try to get the most out of it.
Yep.